We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk News for the week ending October 9th. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Kurt Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
Every week, Kurt and I get together to discuss the biggest stories in the cannabis industry, and this week was historic for a number of reasons, and even here in New England is where we're going to start, because Vermont has gone legal, Maine is open for business, Kamala Harris calls for decriminalization of cannabis at the federal level, and Illinois sets another monthly sales record. But once again, the big story here in New England, yes, Kurt, you said it, the state of Ben & Jerry's, Fish and Spaceman Bill Lee, it's now almost ready to sell weed and buy it.
And as we've talked about in the previous shows, how did Vermont not have recreational weed? That would have been a great trivia question for saying they have to, right? It's Vermont. But it's good to see that the governor is actually not signing the bill, but he's going to allow it to become law. We also have Maine, 2.5 years in the waiting, ready to go, I believe even tomorrow, starting selling rec. So I like to call it the green wave of New England is starting now.
Absolutely, and you know that there's pressure on New Hampshire because they're now surrounded by legal states.
Well, yeah, Governor Sununu is going to have to look at the tax. He may not prefer it as his constituency would vote for, but it's tax revenue. It's about money. And so that's something he's going to have to consider if he's surrounded by cannabis-friendly states that are taking that tax revenue. Forget the medicinal or the recreational enjoyment value. So Sununu is on the hot seat.
Absolutely. And let's get back to the Vermont story for a second. You know, it's been a long journey for cannabis advocates like Matt Simon, the New England political director of the Marijuana Policy Project. This is the first state in the union to legalize cannabis through the legislature instead of the ballot box. I talked to Matt earlier today, and he recapped the road to legalization in the Green Mountain State.
Vermont passed a very limited medical cannabis law back in 2004. They expanded it a few years later. They added dispensaries a few years later, decriminalization in 2013. And then for the last several years, we've been trying to get cannabis to be actually legalized for adult use, have an actual regulated system, and transition the medical system, which was regulated by a law enforcement agency and still is. And that makes no sense whatsoever. Part of this new bill is that the new Cannabis Control Board will regulate all adult use and medical cannabis, and that's just huge win. A lot of work left to do to implement it, obviously, and get it up and running, but a huge step forward to see a legislature do this, to have a Republican governor not sign the bill, but allow it to become law without his signature and see a state move forward. It's terrific.
Now, I also talked with the communications director of the National Cannabis Industry Association, his name is Morgan Fox, about the significance of Vermont becoming the 11th state in the union to open up legal sales of cannabis to adults.
Well, I think that it was really important given that before Vermont passed its initial possession and home cultivation law, every single state that had passed an adult use law had done so through the voters. So it was the first state to really approach this through its legislature, even if they only took the half measure of only legalizing possession and home cultivation. And it is absolutely amazing that they've completed the circle and done what other states were, forward-thinking enough to do at the outset of ending prohibition.
Fantastic. And of course, now as we look towards the November ballot box, there are a number of other states out there. What do you know? How is the initiative going in those other states?
As far as I know, all of them are polling pretty well. Anything can change on election day, and I don't know if all of them have what I consider to be the safe zone of having a 10-point lead, but they're all looking pretty good. I think the only one that's in danger is maybe Mississippi, because the legislature put a very misleading and much more heavily restricted ballot initiative on the ballot right next to the activist and patient-focused one, and the way that you fill it out is very confusing. But other than that, it looks like we're going to add at least a couple of new adult use states and hopefully another medical state come November.
The NCIA is the lobbyist group in Washington, D.C., and Morgan admitted that the last few months have been a little frustrating because of the partisan politics that has stopped the MORE Act and the Safe Banking Act from moving forward. Never a dull moment in D.C., is it, Kurt?
No, and it's really one of those things where we got asked the other day, and we're doing a piece on when will cannabis be legalized, and it's when the House and Senate become Democratic. President is actually irrelevant at this point. It's if the House stays Democratic and the Senate switches to Democratic, they have enough votes to override any presidential veto or slowdown. So really, that's the moment in time on election day you want to be looking for, not so much even the presidency, because if both houses have override, they could override Trump or Biden if he decides to slow it down.
And it will be historic no matter what happens in the next few weeks. But the most important thing, and we always talk about this, please exercise your right to vote. It would be great if the United States could actually have a record amount of voters in this election. To me, that would be a huge win for democracy. Agreed, Kurt?
It would be, but no chance with COVID. There's going to be too much fear about going to a voting booth. There'll be lines, there'll be masks, there'll be horror stories about mail-in ballots. So the theory is yes, but the reality is it won't happen this election with masks and COVID alone.
Well, I know there's already been hundreds of thousands of votes already cast. My ballot is in my house, and I will be voting next week, and I will be bringing it to town hall because I want to make sure that it gets counted correctly. In the meantime, let's go back to Washington, D.C. for the D.C. report with Phil Adams of the Vote Pro podcast crew. Phil?
I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, and this is the Weed Talk News DC report. The advocacy group, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, filed an amicus brief with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals last week, siding with the plaintiffs in a suit against the Drug Enforcement Administration. The suit challenges the constitutionality of the DEA's Schedule I classification of cannabis. The IAVA argued that the classification is inhibiting studies that could demonstrate the therapeutic potential of cannabis in treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder, among other conditions. Such a finding, ironically, would preclude one of the criteria for Schedule I classification. The original suit was filed back in 2017 by a coalition of medical cannabis patients and activists. Several members of Congress have formally called on the U.S. Supreme Court to hear the case. No decision on that has yet been announced. U.S. Congresswoman Shelley Pingree of Maine is helping her constituents to be good cannabis customers. With the legalization of cannabis for adult use set to take effect in Maine this week, Pingree tweeted a link to a recent Portland Press Herald article about what folks should know before heading to the dispensary. Pingree urged Mainers to, quote, do your research before waiting in line. The U.S. Supreme Court has declined to hear an appeal by Colorado cannabis company Helix Technologies to dismiss a lawsuit against them. The suit alleges that Helix failed to pay certain employees the overtime they were owed. Helix argued unsuccessfully in the lower court that because cannabis is outlawed under federal law, employees are not protected under the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act. The lower court refused to dismiss the suit, ruling that the FLSA protection has nothing to do with the Controlled Substances Act. After an unsuccessful appeal to the 10th Circuit Court to have the suit dismissed, Helix took it up with the Supreme Court. The High Court's decision not to hear the case means the original ruling stands and the suit can move forward. That's this week's Weed Talk News DC report from the nation's capital. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
While the word cannabis was not mentioned during the presidential debate, it did come up in the vice presidential debate. Kamala Harris waved the Democratic platform, a promise of federal decriminalization, and VP Mike Pence, well, he attacked her and her record as Attorney General of California from 10 years ago. Now, Kurt, a lot has changed on the green wave over the past 10 years, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about this. We've written about it at cannabis.net. Do you look at someone's history of their interpretation of drug laws and how harsh they came down on them? Or have they been educated, as Gene Simmons would say, about cannabis, and now they feel there's some, expungement, decriminalization? I still think that's kissing your sister. It's not good enough. But I have a feeling they're just kind of doing this before election in order to not turn off maybe moderate voters who aren't so pro-pot as we are. And then after the election, you're certainly going to see decriminalization, if not, like we just said, with the two houses, full legalization.
So I'm going to ask you, I know you were in the room with me when I interviewed Steve D'Angelo in CanX at Jamaica last September. And I remembered asking him, what happens if in October 2020, the President of the United States, Mr. Trump, decides to pick up the phone and call the DOJ and deschedule cannabis? Would that sway the election? I know it might sway a few voters, including Steve.
It's funny. There's an article going around this week that kind of hints at that. This is a prominent attorney who feels that that could be the case. I think it's too little too late. I think there's just enough. There's too much water under the bridge. If this is a close election, 2 to 3 points, it could be enough. But basically, you're saying you'll take President Trump for another 4 years just on that small issue swing. If that's how small you're deciding between these two candidates, I don't think that margin is that big for most people. And they're going to vote for Biden anyway if they want legalization of cannabis.
There you go. Another month and another sales record for the state of Illinois. In August, they surpassed 95 million in sales. And now in September, those sales numbers are at 99 million plus for the month. The total since adult use started in the state of Lincoln, over $431 million. Kurt, Chicago, obviously a good place to go visit. And needless to say, you can now buy adult use weed there, and a lot of people are.
Yeah, and we talked about this. Here's an example of Governor Pritzker doing a great job at rolling it out and creating the tax revenue they desperately need, compared to, say, how Governor Baker did it here in Mass. And 2, the gray and black market in the Midwest must be booming. You've created a central hub at a Midwestern city through the Plain States where you have Oklahoma with all those dispensaries. So that's 99 million is just on the legal market. I can tell you right now, it's a lot bigger than that. Total sales of cannabis, if you include all markets.
That would be the ones that would be illegal at this point,
right.
But they're certainly out there and they are thriving. Now, Illinois' next door state neighbor, Ohio, had a little issue with some edibles. Encore edible chocolates were recalled after heavy metals were found in 8 dispensaries between August 17th and October 1st. How these medicinal products made it to the shelves is the question that labs are now facing in Ohio. And Kurt, that's the whole point of the legal market, is to get every product tested that's in a dispensary, right?
Yeah, there's going to be growing pains. And obviously this is a pretty serious one. Lab testing, we've had it here in Massachusetts where labs have used cleaning material on their instruments that caused contamination, supposedly, of the cannabis too. So I think it's in the short run, it's going to hurt the reputation, but in the long run, if consumers know that this is being watched and monitored so tightly, they're going to feel more comfortable once they get over this hurdle, knowing these things are being checked for, and when they find them, they pull them back.
And next up is the sad story of the fires that continue to wreak havoc on the cannabis industry in California and Oregon. Canyon Cannabis was destroyed on September 8th in Gates, Oregon. The owner, Thorin Thacker, has poured his life savings into that business and he couldn't get insurance. Always a challenge in the cannabis industry. We're building a group of experts in the cannabis industry, and Bill Perrier of Charles River Insurance Brokers explains the challenges and how his group can help.
Crop coverage is available. It can be expensive. But he also thinks it has high deductibles. In farming, folks, a lot of times we're run on very small margins. They're kind of like grocery stores. The farms run, they worry about the weather, just in general, the crop. So because it can be high priced, it can be high deductibles. Some people will roll the dice and not get it. The other interesting thing about fire coverage, it's not necessarily the fire. It's the ash and the chemicals from the fire spray that might be 10 miles away, 20 miles away, the ash and the smoke that gets onto the product, and then the product is useless. The other real serious thing is sometimes the town will make you evacuate the property. They'll say the fire's coming, you got to get out, and then you can't get back to the property to water the crops. So simply by not watering them, you lose it.
And Jimmy, I know this week there's more COVID carnage in the MJ BizCon world as your Your favorite Las Vegas Expo and mine, MJ BizCon, will not be taking place in the Las Vegas Convention Center this year, but it will be all virtual and extended over a few weeks. Obviously, our friend Chris Walsh, who runs MJ Biz, it's going to be disappointing. Obviously, he's a really sharp thinker. He planned ahead. He thought this could happen, and he has alternative plans, but certainly a disappointment that you and I won't be going to Vegas this year. Do you agree?
Oh, no, it was a great time, Kurt. And again, you kind of gave me my virgin voyage to Vegas when it came to weed. So that was a lot of fun for sure. And I met some great people. It turns out that the CEO of MJ BizCon, Chris Walsh, will be joining the Pro Cannabis Media live stream at 5 o'clock Eastern Time on our twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media channel. Remember the days, Kurt, when it was channel 4, 5, and 7 in Massachusetts?
And you had to go to 56 and 38 to watch the Godzilla movies or the Red Sox.
There you go. And now it's time for the Canadian Cannabis Report with Solomon Israel from MJ Biz Daily International. Solomon?
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily International, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Top executives at Aurora Cannabis got millions of dollars worth of bonuses and raises for the company's last fiscal year, regulatory filings show. That's despite the fact that Aurora lost more than 3 billion Canadian dollars that year. Aurora founder and former CEO Terry Booth was awarded compensation worth nearly 5 million Canadian dollars. In New Brunswick, government-owned marijuana monopoly Cannabis NB posted a quarterly profit of 3.3 million Canadian dollars. The retailer sold more than $20 million worth of marijuana through its 20 stores during the quarter, but a government review of whether or not to sell off the retailer to the private sector is continuing after a provincial election last month. And Canadian cannabis cultivator Aphria has made its first shipment of medical marijuana from Canada to Germany. Aphria told Marijuana Business Daily the products should be available through German pharmacies in the near future. Germany was the top export destination for Canadian medical cannabis last year. You can read those stories and more at mjbizdaily.com. I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily.
Did you know that the U.S. cannabis industry already employs over 250,000 people? And that number reflects the ones who actually touch the plant, not the ancillary jobs that are also part of that industry. These facts and more are available in the MJ Biz Fact Book, available on the MJ Biz Daily site or at mjbizfactbook.com. Finally tonight, the music world lost a legend this past week with the passing of rock guitarist Eddie Van Halen. And sure enough, there's another music legend that is getting into the cannabis business. His name is Carlos Santana. Pretty good guitarist in his own right. It's called Marvaro by Santana, and that means my ray, as opposed to my way. He'll have flowers and pre-rolls, and his Left Coast Ventures group is working with the family of Bob Marley and Mickey Hart of the Grateful Dead, who also has a celebrity brand he calls Mind Your Head. So, Kurt, musicians and weed really have always gone together, haven't they?
Absolutely. In the end, though, customers will decide which products, give them the value and the enjoyment. So I like the fact that musicians are using their natural influence with the crowds they have to promote their product. But I don't think you're going to see, 15 of these musicians surviving in the end. There'll be a few, but it better be a good product.
That's what it's all about, is the quality of the product, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the price. But I hope, there's different niches each musician will have, whether you're a Deadhead or a fan of Santana, or even obviously Snoop with his Leafs, and they've been successful. Again, it's marketing. You have a good product and people will want to associate with it, including your fans.
Well, we want you, the viewer, to associate with us. Please subscribe, like, and share, and that'll do it for another week of Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Kurt Dalton with Cannabis.net.
Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Weed Talk Now, Weed Talk News, and In the Weeds are all available on most major podcast distributors like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and our friends at clnsmedia.com and our flagship, Cannabis.net. So subscribe, share, and like our videos on all the social media networks out there, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the WeedTube, and YouTube. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.